December 28, 1976. England, London, Black House. With reverence, Sergei once again wiped the chrome details of his Harley with a cloth. Even now, shivers ran down his spine at the sight of the predatory, elegant, and undoubtedly expensive cruiser he could never have dreamed of in his previous life. Unless he was interested in history and collecting clippings from foreign magazines, to which he had access through work. In his memory, the FXS 1200 lowrider was released only a year, maybe even two, in 77th or 78th. Apparently, money works wonders. He himself couldn't believe he had a model that hadn't even been showcased at expos yet. After the gift-giving, Sergei vividly remembered his daughter, Lyuska, sleeping with her toys. He didn't drag the Harley into bed, of course, but he placed it in the center of his room. Thanks to the house elves' technology moving abilities, there were no problems. After all, the manor didn't have a garage or even a stable, the Blacks didn't keep riding animals. It was winter outside, with slush and dampness, and you wouldn't ride such a beauty in that weather, especially since his mother had immediately stipulated that this gift was for his experiments. And that meant he had to disassemble it, inscribe the necessary runes and contours, conduct additional checks, and then put it back together. Everything was written in a thick notebook, and the finalized magical contour drawing was already prepared. But this was a lengthy task that couldn't be rushed or done carelessly. So, Sergei planned to work on the Harley during the summer break, especially since there were still some questions remaining. He wasn't satisfied that changing the fuel injection system to make the machine fly essentially turned the motorcycle into something that didn't just ride like Muggle transport, perhaps only by coasting. Sergei wanted both that and more. Perhaps he needed to devise some kind of magical fuel equivalent. Thankfully, he had a good understanding of the mechanics and systems in the machine's operation and understood where the conflict arose. Perhaps he needed to create a switch that toggled between different modes of movement. For now, he took measurements and made adjustments to the blueprints for the specific model, as Sirius's initial calculations were linked to a different brand. A quiet knock sounded on the door. "Yes, come in," Sergei called out, as he was in a somewhat awkward position, inspecting and sketching the fuel tank. Severus Snape peeked into the room and entered. "Ah, hello. You're the one I need. Answer me this, do wizards have any kind of gasoline equivalent? You do know what that is, right?"
Of course, it's a fuel that powers automobiles. And we have a generator at home that runs on diesel fuel, so I have an idea of what you're talking about. But why do you need an equivalent?
There's a conflict between magic and mechanics. I thought I could create a chain similar to the one that makes the wheels turn, but entirely powered by magic. Otherwise, it's not working. I want to both fly and ride on the ground with my beauty.
What's this chain you're talking about?
Snape asked, tilting his head to the side like a bird. It's all about the internal combustion engine. Look, here's the fuel tank, fuel goes in here, it goes through these pipes to the carburetor, where the fuel mixes with air and is dosed into the combustion chamber. There, the air-fuel mixture ignites. During combustion, the volume of gases increases, pushing the pistons. There are two of them. They move the crankshaft, converting linear motion into rotational motion. Kind of like when you ride a bicycle, the principle is the same. The torque from the crankshaft is transmitted to the gearbox, and from there through a chain to the drive wheel. This way, the wheel spins, and I can control that. If I twist the throttle, the fuel delivery increases or decreases, and so does my speed. There's also gear shifting. Essentially, I choose a speed range, but that's not so important.
What speed can this motorcycle reach?
Snape asked, blinking after his brief lecture.
So, only one wheel spins?
The speed of this cruiser is around 100 miles per hour. And yes, one wheel is sufficient. The rear wheel sets the whole motorcycle in motion, and I only steer with the front one, controlling the technology.
You'll have to overhaul this complex system. It takes up too much space to just spin one wheel, and as far as I know, gasoline is explosive. At this rate, you might as well try pouring dragon's blood into your tank. That's a thought.
Exactly. Dragons breathe fire. Sergei exclaimed, illuminated by the idea. If I enchant, then I might not have to change the familiar system, and it won't conflict. But an additional switch? What if I install it instead of shifting into fourth gear? In principle, I could try rearranging things.
Sirius.
Severus interrupted Sergei's moment of enlightenment.
Tomorrow for lunch, Severus Prince is coming to your house.
Severus who? Sergei was surprised, trying to comprehend Snape's words through the blueprints and diagrams that had captured his attention.
It's kind of like my grandfather.
Snape shrugged nervously.
Prince is my mother's maiden name. Lady Walburga asked me about my family before Christmas.
Ah, yes, I remember, Sergei nodded. I just didn't realize you both have the same name. And? Did he? Or? Oh. Did you ask him? Or did you write to him?
No.
Snape shrugged his shoulder again.
Lady Walburga asked me before Christmas. In short, she decided to invite my grandfather to your house so that we could meet on neutral ground. He didn't reply for a while, but he responded today.
Nervous? Sergei asked, understanding Snape like no one else. In the orphanage, relatives sometimes appeared, including those who couldn't take the children away but only came to visit. Their arrival was always accompanied by hope that turned into tantrums and despair.
No! I mean... I don't know.
Snape frowned, as if retreating into an invisible shell.
But... Lady Walburga said he might not have known about my existence at all.
You don't have to throw yourself into his arms with tears in your eyes, Sergei observed, turning to the window to avoid embarrassing Snape. You're an independent guy, you're turning 17 soon, right? Regulus said your birthday's in January. You're smart, well-mannered, you can stand up for yourself, you know a lot about both our worlds. Whether he knew about you or not. You've grown up on your own, without their help or support. You're already your own person. Just look at this grandpa of yours. You're a Slytherin, they say you guys, well, can come out on top in any situation. What's he going to do to you? Nothing. He has no authority over you. Well, maybe he'll acknowledge you, but that's not certain either. You know that purebloods can be, well, all sorts of things.
Yeah, I don't really expect much.
Snape replied from behind.
I don't know if I should tell him about Tobias's death or not. I feel sorry for Mother.
Tobias? Sergei turned around.
That's my father. Mother wrote to me that he passed away in early December. He drank a lot at the pub, then fell asleep on the street and froze. It was the first snow. I never go home during winter and spring breaks, it's an extra expense, and Tobias always caused a scene when I was home. Mother said he was different without me and hardly ever hit her. In the letter, she asked me to pray for him but not to come.
Sergei swallowed at such revelations. Severus, he cleared his throat, I think we should visit your mother. It's Christmas after all. The house elf can take us to your house. I want to help. And, we can ask her about your grandpa, what to expect from him. Maybe she'll tell you something useful about her father. Snape sighed softly, his shoulders sagged. He even stumbled a bit, and Sergei quickly approached, peering into the black eyes. Come on, get dressed. I'll tell my mother where we're going and ask Regulus's house elf. I think he won't refuse.
I thought you could apparate already. You turned 17 almost 2 months ago.
Ah. I decided to wait on that until I receive official training from the ministry, especially since I don't even know where your house is located. But if you don't want a house elf, we can use muggle transportation or the night.
You might as well suggest a broomstick. I'm going to get dressed.
Cokeworth, despite Sergei having only seen a glimpse of the street where Creature had transported them, left a rather unpleasant impression. just like in Soviet propaganda about the bourgeoisie and how there were slums right next to the megacities. The Snape house was fairly large, a two-story structure with a flat roof. It was the last house on a street with evidently standardized architecture, where all the buildings were equally grim and, despite their separateness, somehow gave off the sensation of stone barracks. Maybe it was the grey, slimer-looking moss that clung to the brown brickwork, the absence of flower beds or any greenery to catch the eye, the tiny gaps between the houses that resembled mouse holes, the blackened and decrepit-looking shutters, or perhaps it was the fact that instead of glass, some windows were covered with cardboard. The pavement, almost the same shade of grey cobblestone, was lightly dusted with dirty snow and black specks of soot. Upon his insistence, they had gone to the supermarket beforehand and bought groceries. Fortunately, Sergei had money. Having experienced ration cards, shortages, and times of semi-starvation, he knew exactly what he needed to buy to ensure they had supplies for a long time. Especially considering that for an unemployed widow after her husband's funeral, there might not be any money not only for delicacies but even for basic bread and milk. Flour, cereals, canned meat, canned goods, condensed milk, biscuits, tea, salt, sugar, butter, the necessary minimum for survival calculated for half a year. It was always best to prepare for the worst. He also bought a large turkey, which was customary to prepare for Christmas. Chocolate, wine, cheese, a couple of dozens of eggs, milk. Fortunately, everything could be condensed into a small package.
I'll pay for everything.
Snape turned pale at the cash register.
I'll return it.
All right, Sergei didn't refuse, knowing that for guys like Severus, it was a matter of honor. I'll get all your first earnings from this werewolf potion, you'll see.
If it gets patented.
Snape relaxed a bit. It will happen, Sergei shrugged. Father was thrilled. And he might influence the committee. They'll review your patent separately, out of turn, when you turn 17. Well, maybe not. Perhaps I've figured out how you can pay back. I'll buy you the ingredients, and you'll brew this potion for Lupin until you finish your education. The services of good potion makers are quite expensive nowadays.
Deal!
Snape smiled. Eileen Snape, Severus' mother, was practically shocked when they appeared at the doorstep. Sergei had the impression that she looked rather disheveled, neglected, and not particularly attractive. The house was clean but not cozy, as if it was inhabited by a ghost rather than a living person. Mrs. Snape seemed unhealthy, very thin and pale, with dark circles under her eyes. The food they brought surprised and almost moved her to tears. Sergei inspected the kitchen and found hardly anything edible, except for a can of lentils. A cold shiver ran down his spine at the thought that they might not have made it in time and Eileen could have starved herself. Most likely, while her husband was alive, if he drank, he at least bought some food or gave her money for groceries. Sergei was deeply struck by this incredible unpreparedness for life. And at the same time, a terrible pride bordering on arrogance and selfishness. Was this what it had come to? Could Severus have come for the summer holidays and found out that his mother had passed away? Or even discovered a cold body right there in the house? Eileen hadn't written to her child that she needed help, money for food, or food itself. But could she have left Severus with the burden of her death like this? Sergei didn't dare to ask anything, but Snape also looked contemplative and didn't inquire about his grandfather from his mother. Once again, summoned by Creature, they were helped with the turkey and the process of cooking was accelerated almost threefold, though it still took a few hours. After a late dinner, they bid farewell to Mrs. Snape and returned to Black House.
Black.
Severus touched his shoulder as they arrived back and Creature transported them to the corridor on the second floor.
Thank you.
Sergei simply nodded and watched as Snape abruptly turned and with tense posture walked into his room.
December 29, 1976. England, London, Black House. Severus didn't hold a grudge against all muggles indiscriminately, only against one whose name he bore, albeit as his second name. Tobias Snape was a muggle and his father, a muggle who hated his own son. And Severus returned that hatred with equal intensity. How happy he was to leave for Hogwarts. Away from that muggle who despised magic in all its forms and nearly broke his mother's wand. Now that unique wand made of ebony wood with Celtic runes belonged to Severus. His mother had managed to gather enough for him to attend the School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Fortunately, in a small trunk where Eileen Snape kept all her past, there were anti-muggle charms, and Tobias never managed to get his hands on her precious books. Severus used his mother's old textbooks, her wand, and even her robes in his early years, when he hadn't grown much. After all, male and female wizard robes were indistinguishable. Later, when he had grown considerably, he managed to save up for something used, even though his robes suffered due to his passion for potions. If it weren't for the muggle Tobias, Severus could have been a full-fledged wizard. Pure-blood lineage was valued in Slytherin. He even coined a nickname for himself, Half-Blood Prince. A small reminder of what could have been. It helped him hold on and feel a connection to the magical heritage. It was his pride, something he desperately clung to, because essentially, it was all he had. Sirius Black was somewhat right when he said that Mr. Prince couldn't do anything to him, but Severus feared that his pure-blood grandfather might simply trample him, not even leaving him the right to the nickname addressed to himself. There was a knock on his door, and when he opened it, Lady Walburga was standing in the doorway. The mother of both Blacks was a very beautiful and stately woman. Her appearance reminded him of his own mother, who... Severus was angry, because yesterday, when they had arrived in Cokeworth at Sirius's insistence, he immediately understood what was happening. It was both embarrassing and hurtful. His mother had decided that he had grown up and no longer needed her? Or was she in the way? Just when there was a faint chance that everything would be resolved. And to hell with Mr. Prince, Severus could already provide for their family on his own. His werewolf potion had impressed Orion Black, and Sirius and Regulus's father considered it his duty to help the talented young man. Talented! How pleasant it was to hear such words. After so many years when Slughorn didn't pay any attention to him at all, allowed others to use the laboratory, invited them to his silly club, Lily was even there, and Severus was never honored. Of course, how could he have afforded gifts and treats for the head of house to open his eyes? After obtaining the patent, Severus could receive small royalties from apothecaries that would fulfill orders for his potions. Maybe not much, but the essentials. And his mother. It hurt so much to be so disappointed in a close person, especially for the second time in his 16 years. First Lily, and now Eileen. Why strangers showed more sympathy, hospitality, and understanding for his problems, Severus couldn't comprehend. But it felt nice.
Don't take this as rudeness, Severus, but...
Lady Walburga looked at him.
I would like to do something about your hair. You have a noble appearance. And you're hiding it. You can keep the length of your hair but maybe open up your temples a bit, so your face doesn't seem too narrow. Or at the very least, you could tie it back. It would be less in the way during potion making.
But, Severus stammered, rubbing his nose. But... As long as he could remember, Tobias had called him ugly. He constantly talked about how he and his mother were repulsive, ugly, frightful, resembling scarecrows, degenerates, and long-nosed monstrosities.
Are you ashamed of your features?
Lady Walburga understood his hesitation.
A man doesn't necessarily have to be handsome to appeal to women. Let me share a great secret with you. Women value inner confidence and composure in men the most. How can I explain this? If you consider yourself unattractive, hide it, and try to cover it up, everyone will see it. It's like... Imagine a small pimple that appears on your nose. Teenagers get those. If you leave it alone or treat it with the right potion overnight, it will go away. But if you try to squeeze it, your entire face might turn red, and then you'll attempt to camouflage it, smearing something over it or covering it up. What will happen eventually?
Everyone will notice that pimple, Severus muttered. Even those who didn't care. And there could also be inflammation and allergies if you use too many different remedies.
Exactly, and people will not only notice that blemish but also your unsuccessful attempts to hide it, your anxieties and concerns. Returning to appearance. Until you have internal self-assurance, external attractiveness won't come either. Which is highly subjective. Some prefer blondes, others brunettes, some like slim, others prefer curvier figures. It's even more complicated with men. I'll admit, I fell in love with my husband's hands, and I've never cared much about his face, and one of my acquaintances. Well, I've already gone too far in this conversation.
Lady Walburga winked cunningly.
In general, look at your grandfather. As far as I remember Severus Prince, you resemble him quite a bit, and there were many rumors about your grandfather being quite the ladies' man, breaking many women's hearts.
Lady Walburga frowned.
It's entirely possible that someone among his rejected admirers sought revenge on your family. Although in terms of appearance, like I said, you resemble each other greatly. So, what do you think about a haircut?
Severus just stared and didn't dare refuse the resourceful woman. His own mother had always been indifferent to how he looked. Eileen had long since given up on herself. And Severus knew that Lady Walburga was older than his mother. Besides, he had the feeling that this woman would look like a queen in exile even if she were in rags. Perhaps this was what Sirius's mother meant by inner confidence. It seemed that Lady Walburga wanted to present his grandfather in the most favorable light. Why she needed to do that, Severus didn't know, but Slytherin wisdom spoke of Cinderella's principle: when you become Cinderella, your fairy godmother knows best which pumpkin to transform into a carriage. And hair. It could grow back 100 times. Mr. Prince, who arrived at the Blacks precisely at 7 in the evening, indeed bore a striking resemblance to his daughter and even to Severus himself. Narrow face, an imposing nose with a bump, black eyes, dark hair, broad eyebrows, a high forehead with a few wrinkles, slightly compressed lips that almost seemed incapable of smiling. His grandfather resembled a predatory bird, a hawk or an old raven. Lean, yet robust for his age. Mr. Prince moved quite swiftly for his years, sharply and nimbly, while still maintaining his dignity. They were introduced. Severus tried to keep his posture straight and not flinch as the guest intently and unblinkingly examined everyone present, pausing briefly with a piercing gaze on him. His throat didn't tighten. The Blacks provided a rather decent meal, but during this dinner, Severus couldn't taste the food. Sirius, who was sitting next to him, gently nudged him in the side and flashed an encouraging smile. That annoyed Severus, as if he was really some kind of Snivelus, as Potter and his cronies called him. He wouldn't show any weakness to those 4 overconfident Gryffindors, and yet he let this prince's presence unravel him like this. A royal name was discovered. He would make the Snape name famous himself. He would invent countless potions. He had even written an article about his potion for the Potioneer's Herald. Orion Black promised that they would definitely publish it. Besides, truth be told, Lady Walburga was right about the hair. With the help of her wand and special spells, she managed to perform a real miracle. Even Regulus didn't recognize him, and Sirius smirked, critically assessing him. Lady Walburga gave Severus a fringe, which made his face no longer seem unbelievably stretched out, and she removed the excessively long strands, revealing his features. The length at the nape remained almost the same, but now, when he leaned forward, nothing brushed his cheeks or fell into his plate. Severus himself incinerated all the cut hair, and Lady Walburga helped him select and even slightly adjusted the clothes to his size. The lunch was informal, not requiring a full parade, so Lady Walburga settled on black trousers and a silk shirt of a golden cream hue. Severus had never owned anything so light in his wardrobe. Black was considered unobtrusive, and after all, school robes were exactly that color. Apart from robes, he had nothing, except for a set of his father's muggle clothing, consisting of dark blue pants and a faded black and gray t-shirt. Moreover, Lady Walburga hinted to him that he should take everything he was wearing with him, as there was no one to clean up after him. Severus was glad that all these transformations would prevent Mr. Prince from seeing a destitute, wretched boy, to mock his fate or to do a favor and make him happy. It was only at the table that Severus realized what Lady Walburga had done. This woman had allowed him to retain his pride. The pride of the half-blood prince. Severus was utterly unclear about the conclusions his grandfather might have drawn about him, if any. Mr. Prince had lunch, engaged in restrained conversation about mutual acquaintances with the black couple, and then swiftly excused himself, citing urgent matters. So much preparation and anticipation, and this prince had spent at the Blacks for at most an hour. Severus was somewhat disappointed, while Lady Walburga, who detained him near the room after lunch, seemed quite satisfied.
Severus, are you upset?
No, he averted his gaze and felt flustered. It's just...
Were you expecting something more?
Lady raised an eyebrow. Perhaps.
You behaved impeccably, Severus.
Lady Walburga encouraged him.
I believe your introduction went wonderfully. Especially now that you've been formally introduced to each other. This means you can start communicating. The fact that you weren't outright rejected is very promising. I apologize for being so direct.
I appreciate that. Severus regained his composure. Thank you for everything you've done for me. Lady Walburga only responded with a cryptic smile.